In the heart of the galaxy, nestled among shimmering stars and swirling nebulae, lay the planet Solvoria. It was a world unlike any other, with forests made entirely of glowing crystals that pulsed softly with light during the day and sparkled like diamonds under its twin moons at night. The air itself seemed alive, carrying whispers of ancient stories, told by the wind as it swept through the towering crystal trees. But for all its beauty, Solvoria held secrets within its borders, secrets that weighed heavily on one young woman in particular. Princess Leora stood alone on the balcony of her family's palace, gazing out at the endless expanse of crystal forests below. She was small, not just in stature, but also in presence compared to others around her. At barely 5 feet tall, she often disappeared into the crowd, her voice drowned out by louder, more imposing figures. Yet what truly set her apart wasn't her size, it was her gift. Her hands could heal wounds, mend broken bones, and even soothe pain simply by touch. A power so rare and precious, yet somehow it had never been enough to make anyone see her worth. Leora sighed, brushing a strand of silver blonde hair from her face. Another suitor had rejected her proposal today, or rather, another suitor had rejected her. Not her title, not her kingdom, but her. They came from distant planets across the galaxy, each hoping to secure an alliance with Solvoria through marriage. But when they saw her delicate frame, heard rumors of her frailty, or learned how little political influence she wielded despite being royalty, their interest faded quickly. Some left politely, offering excuses about incompatible schedules or prior commitments. Others didn't bother hiding their disdain, speaking openly about how unsuitable she was. Her parents, Cain Aldrin and Queen Seraphine, tried their best to shield her from the hurtful comments. They reminded her daily that she was special, that her healing abilities were a blessing few could claim. Still, no amount of reassurance could erase the sting of rejection. For years now, Leora had retreated further into herself, burying her dreams beneath layers of disappointment. She spent most of her days studying old star charts in the library, tracing constellations with her fingertips while imagining far-off worlds where perhaps someone might value her for who she truly was. Today, however, something felt different. As Leora turned away from the balcony, she noticed movement in the courtyard below. A sleek spacecraft had landed near the palace gates, its metallic surface gleaming in the sunlight. Curious, she leaned over the railing to get a better look. Out stepped a man clad in a dark blue uniform adorned with golden insignias. His boots clicked against the stone pathway as he moved toward the entrance, his posture confident yet unassuming. Unlike the flamboyant aliens who usually visited, this stranger carried himself with quiet dignity. "That must be Captain Elias Vane," murmured a voice behind her. Startled, Leora turned to find her older sister, Princess Amara, standing there with a knowing smile. "He's human, from Earth, if you can believe it. Apparently, he's here seeking permission to mine luminolite." "Luminolite?" Leora asked, furrowing her brow. The mineral was rare and highly valuable, used in advanced technology and medicine alike. Its extraction required royal approval, which meant Captain Vane would likely attend tonight's banquet to formally request access. Amara nodded. "Mother and father are eager to meet him. Humans don't visit Solvoria often, and their united stellar fleet is said to be quite influential. Maybe he'll bring some excitement to this dull place." She winked before walking off, leaving Leora to her thoughts. Hours later, the grand hall buzzed with activity as guests mingled and laughed. Leora lingered near the edges of the room, sipping water from a glass goblet while observing the scene unfold. Most attendees ignored her entirely, too engrossed in their conversations to notice the petite princess tucked away in the shadows. That suited her fine. She preferred watching people to being watched. Then, as if drawn by some invisible force, her gaze landed on Captain Vane. He stood apart from the crowd, his sharp features illuminated by the soft glow of floating lanterns above. Unlike the other dignitaries, He wasn't loudly boasting about his achievements or trying to impress anyone. Instead, he listened intently to those around him, nodding thoughtfully and asking questions. There was an authenticity to him that intrigued Leora. Their eyes met briefly, and for a moment, time seemed to pause. Leora quickly looked away, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. She hadn't expected such intensity in his gaze, or the way it made her feel seen, even from across the room. Eventually, protocol demanded introductions. When Leora approached alongside her parents, Captain Vane bowed respectfully, his expression warm but measured. "Your Highness," he said, addressing her directly. "It's an honor to meet you." The words startled her. No one ever addressed her first unless prompted. She hesitated before replying, her voice barely above a whisper. "The honor is mine, Captain." As they exchanged pleasantries, Leora found herself relaxing slightly. Captain Vane asked thoughtful questions about Solvoria's history and culture, showing genuine interest rather than feigned politeness. By the end of their conversation, Leora couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope, a tiny spark that maybe, just maybe, this human stranger might see her differently than the rest. When the evening drew to a close, Leora returned to her chambers, her mind racing with possibilities. She knew better than to let her guard down completely. After all, countless suitors had started off charming only to reveal their true intentions later. But there was something about Captain Elias Vane that lingered in her thoughts long after he'd retired for the night. Perhaps, she mused as she gazed out her window at the stars, the universe still held surprises for her, and perhaps, just perhaps, one of them might finally prove that she was worthy, not because of her title or her powers, but because of who she was inside. The next morning dawned bright and clear, the twin suns of Solvoria casting golden light across the palace grounds. Princess Leora sat in her private study, surrounded by shelves lined with ancient scrolls and star charts. Her fingers traced the edge of a map showing the lumina-like mines located deep within the crystal forests. The mineral was precious, not only for its rarity but also for its ability to power advanced technology and medical devices. For years, Solvoria had guarded it closely, allowing only trusted allies access to its reserves. Leora's thoughts drifted back to Captain Elias Vane. His presence lingered in her mind, like the faint hum of the crystals outside her window. There was something different about him, something genuine. Unlike the alien dignitaries who saw her as nothing more than a fragile princess unworthy of attention, Elias had treated her with respect. He hadn't dismissed her quietly or avoided eye contact. Instead, he'd listened intently when she spoke and asked thoughtful questions. It was disarming, almost unnerving, to feel seen after so many years of being overlooked. Her musings were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. "Enter," she called, turning to see her father, King Aldrin. "Step inside." His tall frame filled the doorway, his silver crown glinting in the sunlight streaming through the windows. "Leora," he began, his tone warm but serious. "Captain Vane has requested an audience regarding the lumina-like mines. Your mother and I believe you should accompany me to the meeting." Her heart skipped a beat. Why would they ask her to join? She wasn't involved in diplomatic matters, nor did anyone typically seek her input on such decisions. Still, she nodded obediently. "Of course, father." When they entered the council chamber later that afternoon, Elias was already seated at the long table, poring over documents spread before him. He looked up as they approached, offering a respectful nod. "Your Majesty," he greeted the king, then turned his gaze to Leora. "Princess." She felt her cheeks flush slightly but managed a small smile in return. As the discussion began, Elias explained his mission clearly and concisely. Earth's United Stellar Fleet needed luminolite to develop life-saving medical equipment for their people. They weren't seeking to exploit Solvoria's resources, but rather hoped to form a mutually beneficial partnership. King Aldrin listened carefully, his expression unreadable. When Elias finished speaking, he leaned back in his chair, stroking his beard thoughtfully. "The mines are treacherous terrain," he said finally. Few outsiders have ventured there safely. If we grant permission, someone familiar with the area must guide you." Elias glanced at Leora, who immediately understood what was coming next. Before she could protest, her father continued, "Leora knows the region well. She will serve as your guide." Her stomach tightened. Guiding a human captain through dangerous territory. This was far beyond anything she'd ever done. Yet, as much as fear gripped her, a part of her stirred with excitement. Perhaps this was her chance to prove herself, to show everyone, including herself, that she was capable of more than they believed. The journey began early the following day. Leora and Elias set out on foot, accompanied by a small team of guards tasked with ensuring their safety. The air grew cooler as they ventured deeper into the crystal forest, the towering trees casting shimmering shadows on the ground. The silence between them was palpable at first, neither sure how to break the ice. Finally, Elias spoke. "Thank you for agreeing to guide me, Princess. I know this isn't easy for you." "It's fine," she replied quickly. Perhaps too quickly. "I studied these maps for years. I can get us there." He smiled faintly. "Still, I appreciate your willingness to help. Not everyone would agree to such a task." Leora hesitated, unsure how to respond. No one had ever thanked her so sincerely before, or acknowledged her efforts without expecting something in return. "You're welcome," she murmured, keeping her eyes fixed ahead. As they walked, Elias shared stories of Earth, the vast oceans, sprawling cities, and diverse cultures that made his home unique. Leora listened intently, fascinated by his descriptions of a world so different from hers. In turn, she told him about Solvoria's history, its crystal forests, and the healing properties of certain plants native to the region. Their conversation flowed naturally, easing the tension between them. By midday, they reached the edge of a steep ravine carved by centuries of flowing water. Across it lay the entrance to the luminolite mines, glowing faintly beneath layers of rock. But crossing wouldn't be simple. A narrow bridge made of twisted vines stretched precariously over the chasm, swaying gently in the breeze. "This doesn't look safe," Elias remarked, peering down at the jagged rocks far below. "It's not," Leora admitted, "but it's the only way across." Without hesitation, she stepped onto the bridge, testing its stability before continuing forward. Elias followed cautiously, his movements deliberate. Halfway across, however, disaster struck. One of the vines snapped under his weight, causing the entire structure to lurch violently. Leora gasped as Elias grabbed hold of the remaining ropes, dangling dangerously above the abyss. "Don't move," she shouted, rushing to his aid. Kneeling at the edge, she extended her hand toward him. "Take my hand." For a moment, Elias hesitated. Trusting someone so small to pull them up seemed impossible, but looking into her determined eyes, he realized he had no choice. Reaching out, he grasped her hand tightly. Summoning strength she didn't know she possessed, Leora pulled with all her might, inching him closer until he scrambled onto solid ground. Breathing heavily, Elias stared at her in awe. "You saved me," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. "It's what I do," she replied softly, brushing dirt from her hands. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of pride, not because of her title or powers, but because she had truly helped someone in need. That night, as they camped beneath the stars, Elias reflected on the day's events. Leora had proven herself far braver and stronger than anyone gave her credit for. Sitting beside the crackling fire, he watched her trace patterns in the dirt with a stick, lost in thought. "You're remarkable, you know," he said suddenly, breaking the quiet. She looked up, startled. "What?" "I mean it," he continued. "Most people would have panicked back there, but you stayed calm and acted decisively. You saved my life." Her cheeks flushed again, but this time, it wasn't out of embarrassment. It was pride. Real, unshakable pride. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. As the flames danced in the darkness, a bond began to form between them. Though they came from worlds apart, They found common ground in their shared humanity, or perhaps something even deeper. Neither knew where this alliance would lead, but both sensed that their paths were intertwined in ways neither could yet understand. And somewhere in the distance, hidden among the shadows of the crystal forest, unseen eyes watched them closely, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The days that followed were a blur of progress and peril. Lyora and Elias continued their journey through the crystal forests, drawing closer to the heart of the Lumina-like mines with each step. The bond between them grew stronger as they faced challenges together, relying on one another's strengths to overcome obstacles. Yet even as trust blossomed, danger lurked just beyond the horizon. One evening, as the twin suns dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, Lyora and Elias made camp near a shimmering stream. The water reflected the glow of the stars above, creating an ethereal scene that felt almost otherworldly. Exhausted from the day's trek, they sat side by side beside the fire, sharing stories and laughter for the first time without reservation. Elias leaned back against a fallen log, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames. "You know," he began thoughtfully, "back on Earth, people often judge others based on appearances or titles. It's easy to overlook someone like you, someone who doesn't shout for attention, but quietly does what needs to be done." Lyora looked down at her hands, which still bore faint scars from years of healing others. "It's not just on Earth," she admitted softly. "Here on Solvoria, I'm dismissed. People see my size, my quiet nature, and assume I'm weak. They don't think I can lead or even contribute. That's their loss," Elias said firmly, turning to meet her eyes. "Anyone who underestimates you is a fool. You've shown me more courage and resilience in these past few days than most people show in a lifetime." Her lips curved into a small smile, though her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. No one had ever spoken about her so openly, so sincerely. For a moment, she allowed herself to believe him, to imagine a world where she wasn't defined by others' expectations, but by her own actions. Their peaceful moment was shattered when a sudden rustling in the bushes caught their attention. Both sprang to their feet, instinctively reaching for whatever weapons they carried. Out of the shadows emerged a group of mercenaries clad in dark armor, their faces obscured by masks. They moved silently, surrounding the camp with practiced precision. "Well, well," sneered their leader, stepping forward. His voice was low and gravelly, carrying a menacing edge. "Looks like we've stumbled upon something valuable. A princess and a human captain. This must be our lucky day." Elias stepped protectively in front of Lyora, his hand gripping the hilt of his blade. "Who are you?" he demanded, his tone steady despite the tension in the air. "Just travelers looking for a little treasure," the mercenary replied with a smirk. "And it seems you're sitting right on top of it. Hand over your maps and supplies, and maybe we'll let you live." Lyora's heart raced as she glanced around, assessing their options. There were too many mercenaries to fight directly, and escape seemed impossible. But then she noticed something. Their leader's arm bore a fresh wound, likely sustained during their journey here. An idea sparked in her mind. "I can help you," she said suddenly, stepping forward despite Elias's protests. Her voice trembled slightly, but she forced herself to sound confident. "I have healing powers. If you lower your weapons, I'll tend to your injuries." The mercenaries exchanged skeptical glances, clearly unsure whether to trust her. Their leader, however, seemed intrigued. After a moment of deliberation, he nodded curtly. "Fine. Prove it." Lyora approached cautiously, her hands raised to show she meant no harm. When she reached the leader, she placed her palms gently on his injured arm. A soft glow emanated from her fingertips as warmth spread through his skin, knitting the torn flesh back together. He winced briefly before relaxing, visibly impressed by her abilities. "There," she said softly, stepping back. "Now will you leave us alone?" The leader hesitated, rubbing his now-healed arm. Then, with a cruel laugh, he shook his head. "Nice try, princess, but we're not leaving empty-handed." With a sharp whistle, The mercenaries lunged forward, weapons drawn. Chaos erupted as Elias and the guards fought fiercely to defend themselves. Leora scrambled to stay out of the way, her heart pounding as shouts and clashing metal filled the air. Just as things seemed hopeless, Elias spotted an opening. Grabbing a nearby branch, he swung it with all his might, knocking several mercenaries off balance. "Leora, run!" he shouted, gesturing toward the dense forest behind them. She hesitated, unwilling to abandon him. But one look at his determined face told her she had no choice. Turning, she sprinted into the trees, her feet crunching against the crystal-laden ground. Behind her, the sounds of battle faded into the distance. Hours later, Leora found herself crouched beneath the shelter of a massive crystal tree, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She had managed to evade the mercenaries, but guilt weighed heavily on her chest. Had she made the right decision? What if Elias had been captured, or worse? Her thoughts were interrupted by a familiar voice. "Leora." She turned to see Elias emerging from the shadows, bloody but alive. Relief washed over her as she rushed to his side. "Are you hurt?" she asked urgently, already reaching for his wounds. "It's nothing serious," he assured her, though his pained expression suggested otherwise. Still, he didn't resist as she placed her hands on his injuries, her healing touch soothing the pain. As the glow faded, he exhaled sharply, leaning against the tree for support. "We need to keep moving," he said after a moment. "They'll be searching for us." Nodding, Leora helped him to his feet. Together, they pressed onward, their pace slow but steady. Along the way, Elias recounted how he and the guards had managed to drive the mercenaries away, at least temporarily. "They won't give up so easily," he warned. "We need to reach the mines soon and secure the luminolite before they catch up." As the royal family grappled with this devastating revelation, the mercenaries tightened their grip on the palace. Under cover of darkness, they launched a surprise attack, storming the gates and overpowering the overwhelmed guards. Within minutes, they had taken control of key areas, trapping many of the palace inhabitants, including members of the royal family, inside. Amidst the confusion, one figure slipped away unnoticed. Princess Amara, Leora's older sister, hurried through secret passageways known only to those closest to the royal lineage. She carried a single thought in her mind: saving her sister. Though their relationship had always been strained, Amara often dismissed Leora as weak and insignificant. The events of recent days had changed her perspective. For the first time, she saw Leora not as a burden, but as a fighter, someone worthy of admiration and protection. Meanwhile, deep within the mines, Leora and Elias prepared to make their escape. Using her knowledge of the tunnels, Leora led them through a series of winding passages that eventually brought them to a hidden exit near the edge of the forest. As they emerged into the cool night air, relief washed over them, only to be short-lived. The mercenaries were waiting. Dozens of armed figures surrounded them, their weapons trained on the pair. The leader stepped forward, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "Thought you could outrun us, did you?" he taunted. "Hand over the luminolite, and maybe we'll let you live." Elias instinctively moved in front of Leora, shielding her with his body. "Over my dead body," he growled, raising his weapon defiantly. "That can be arranged," the leader replied, motioning for his men to advance. Just as it seemed all hope was lost, a new voice rang out. "Leave them alone." Everyone turned to see Amara standing at the edge of the clearing, her regal presence commanding attention despite the chaos. In her hands, she held a device that pulsed with energy, a prototype weapon developed using Solvoria's advanced technology. "You want the luminolite," she demanded, her voice steady and strong. "Then come and get it, from me." The mercenaries hesitated, unsure how to respond. Seizing the opportunity, Elias grabbed Leora's hand and pulled her toward the trees. "Go," he urged. "I'll hold them off." "No," Leora protested, tears streaming down her face. "I won't leave you. You have to." he insisted, his eyes filled with determination. "Trust me." Reluctantly, Leora obeyed, disappearing into the shadows just as the mercenaries turned their focus back to Elias and Amara. Together, the two fought valiantly, buying precious. Hours later, Leora stumbled into the safety of a nearby village, collapsing onto the ground in exhaustion. Her mind raced with questions. Was Elias still alive? Had Amara succeeded in holding off the mercenaries? And who had betrayed them? As dawn broke over the horizon, casting golden light across the land, Leora resolved to return to the palace, not as a fragile princess, but as a leader ready to reclaim her throne and uncover the truth. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them head-on. For the first time in years, she felt truly alive and determined to prove her worth to herself and the world. The first rays of sunlight pierced through the thick canopy of the crystal forest, casting shimmering patterns on the ground. Princess Leora sat huddled in a small village cottage, her body weary but her mind racing. She had spent the night recovering from her harrowing escape, tended to by kind villagers who recognized her royal insignia and offered shelter without question. Though grateful for their hospitality, Leora couldn't shake the guilt gnawing at her heart. Elias had risked everything to protect her, and Amara, her own sister, had stepped up in ways she never expected. Now, both were likely captured or worse, and it was all because of her. She clenched her fists, resolve hardening within her. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about reclaiming what was hers, not just her title as princess, but her dignity, her strength, and her voice. For too long, she had let others define her worth. No more. It was time to stand tall and fight back, for Solvoria, for its people, and for those who had believed in her when no one else did. By mid-morning, Leora set out toward the palace with a group of loyal villagers armed with whatever weapons they could muster. News of the mercenaries' takeover had spread quickly, igniting outrage among the citizens of Solvoria. Many saw this as an attack not only on the royal family, but on their way of life. Determined to drive the invaders out, they rallied behind Leora, seeing in her a symbol of hope and resilience. As they approached the outskirts of the palace, Leora paused to address the crowd. Standing atop a rocky ledge overlooking the gathered villagers, she took a deep breath. Public speaking had always terrified her, but today, fear would. As the royal family grappled with this devastating revelation, the mercenaries tightened their grip on the palace. Under cover of darkness, they launched a surprise attack, storming the gates and overpowering the overwhelmed guards. Within minutes, they had taken control of key areas, trapping many of the palace inhabitants, including members of the royal family, inside. Amidst the confusion, one figure slipped away unnoticed. Princess Amara, Leora's older sister, hurried through secret passageways known only to those closest to the royal lineage. She carried a single thought in her mind: saving her sister. Though their relationship had always been strained, Amara often dismissed Leora as weak and insignificant. The events of recent days had changed her perspective. For the first time, she saw Leora not as a burden, but as a fighter, someone worthy of admiration and protection. Meanwhile, deep within the mines, Leora and Elias prepared to make their escape. Using her knowledge of the tunnels, Leora led them through a series of winding passages that eventually brought them to a hidden exit near the edge of the forest. As they emerged into the cool night air, relief washed over them, only to be short-lived. The mercenaries were waiting. Dozens of armed figures surrounded them, their weapons trained on the pair. The leader stepped forward, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "Thought you could outrun us, did you?" he taunted. "Hand over the luminolite, and maybe we'll let you live." Elias instinctively moved in front of Leora, shielding her with his body. "Over my dead body," he growled, raising his weapon defiantly. "That can be arranged," the leader replied, motioning for his men to advance. Just as it seemed all hope was lost, a new voice rang out. "Leave them alone." Everyone turned to see Amara standing at the edge of the clearing, her regal presence commanding attention despite the chaos. In her hands, she held a device that pulsed with energy, a prototype weapon developed using Solvoria's advanced technology. "You want the luminolite," she demanded, her voice steady and strong. "Then come and get it from me." The mercenaries hesitated, unsure how to respond. Seizing the opportunity, Elias grabbed Leora's hand and pulled her toward the trees. "Go," he urged. "I'll hold them off." "No," Leora protested, tears streaming down her face. "I won't leave you." "You have to," he insisted, his eyes filled with determination. "Trust me." Reluctantly, Leora obeyed, disappearing into the shadows just as the mercenaries turned their focus back to Elias and Amara. Together, the two fought valiantly, buying precious. Hours later, Leora stumbled into the safety of a nearby village, collapsing onto the ground in exhaustion. Her mind raced with questions. Was Elias still alive? Had Amara succeeded in holding off the mercenaries? And who had betrayed them? As dawn broke over the horizon, casting golden light across the land, Leora resolved to return to the palace, not as a fragile princess, but as a leader ready to reclaim her throne and uncover the truth. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them head-on. For the first time in years, she felt truly alive and determined to prove her worth to herself and the world. The first rays of sunlight pierced through the thick canopy of the crystal forest, casting shimmering patterns on the ground. Princess Leora sat huddled in a small village cottage, her body weary but her mind racing. She had spent the night recovering from her harrowing escape, tended to by kind villagers who recognized her royal insignia and offered shelter without question. Though grateful for their hospitality, Leora couldn't shake the guilt gnawing at her heart. Elias had risked everything to protect her, and Amara, her own sister, had stepped up in ways she never expected. Now, both were likely captured or worse, and it was all because of her. She clenched her fists, resolve hardening within her. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about reclaiming what was hers, not just her title as princess, but her dignity, her strength, and her voice. For too long, she had let others define her worth. No more. It was time to stand tall and fight back, for Solvoria, for its people, and for those who had believed in her when no one else did. By mid-morning, Leora set out toward the palace with a group of loyal villagers armed with whatever weapons they could muster. News of the mercenaries' takeover had spread quickly, igniting outrage among the citizens of Solvoria. Many saw this as an attack not only on the royal family, but on their way of life. Determined to drive the invaders out, they rallied behind Leora, seeing in her a symbol of hope and resilience. As they approached the outskirts of the palace, Leora paused to address the crowd. Standing atop a rocky ledge overlooking the gathered villagers, she took a deep breath. Public speaking had always terrified her, but today, fear would not hold her back. "People of Solvoria," she began, her voice trembling slightly but growing steadier with each word. "Our home is under siege. The mercenaries have taken what does not belong to them, threatening our peace and our future. But we cannot let fear rule us. We are stronger together than they will ever be." Her words sparked cheers from the crowd, their faces filled with determination. Encouraged by their support, Leora continued, "I may be small, but I am not weak. And neither are you. Today, we reclaim our palace and our pride." With renewed vigor, the group pressed onward, using secret passages known only to Leora to bypass the mercenaries guarding the perimeter. Inside the palace walls, chaos reigned. The invaders had set up camp in the grand hall, scattering priceless artifacts and defiling sacred spaces. Soldiers loyal to the crown engaged in skirmishes throughout the corridors, but they were outnumbered and struggling to hold their ground. Lyra led her team through hidden tunnels that connected the servants' quarters to the throne room. Along the way, they encountered pockets of resistance, freeing captured guards and civilians trapped by the mercenaries. Each victory bolstered their spirits, proving that unity could overcome even the greatest odds. Finally, they reached the throne room. The heavy doors stood slightly ajar, revealing a scene that made Leora's blood boil. The leader of the mercenaries sat arrogantly upon her father's throne, his boots resting insolently on the armrest. Around him, several of his men held King Aldrin, Queen Seraphine, and Amara captive, their faces bruised but defiant. "You dare desecrate my family's throne?" Leora demanded, stepping into the room with unwavering confidence. Behind her, the villagers surged forward, surrounding the mercenaries and cutting off any chance of escape. The mercenary leader sneered, rising to his feet. "Ah, the little princess finally shows up. Thought you'd abandoned your parents, didn't you?" "I'm here to take back what's mine," Leora replied coolly, her voice steady despite the fury coursing through her veins. "And I won't let you hurt my family, or my people, anymore." Before he could respond, Elias appeared from a side entrance, battered but alive. He carried a makeshift weapon fashioned from debris found in the mines, his eyes blazing with determination. "Looks like the odds just shifted," he said with a smirk, standing beside Leora. Caught off guard by the sudden appearance of reinforcements, the mercenaries faltered. Seizing the moment, Leora used her healing powers to incapacitate several of them, targeting their injuries to render them unable to fight further. The villagers charged forward, overwhelming the remaining intruders until none were left standing. Once the throne room was secured, Leora turned her attention to her family. Rushing to her parents' side, she embraced them tightly, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I should have been here sooner." King Aldrin placed a hand on her shoulder, pride shining in his eyes. "You've done more than anyone could have asked of you, my daughter. Today, you prove yourself not just as a princess, but as a true leader." Amara stepped forward, offering a rare smile. "You saved us, Leora. Thank you." For the first time in years, Leora felt accepted, not as someone to be pitied or dismissed, but as an equal. The weight of rejection she had carried for so long began to lift, replaced by a sense of belonging and purpose. Later that evening, after the palace had been cleared and order restored, Leora addressed the entire court. Standing before a sea of dignitaries, advisors, and citizens, she delivered a speech that would echo through the halls of history. "For too long, I allowed others to define me," she began, her voice ringing clear and strong. "They called me fragile, insignificant, unworthy. But I am none of those things. I am Leora of Solvoria, and I will not hide in the shadows any longer." Applause erupted from the crowd, filling the grand hall with warmth and admiration. Even those who had once doubted her now looked upon her with newfound respect. Elias watched from the sidelines, his heart swelling with pride. Leora had transformed before his eyes, from a quiet, uncertain young woman into a courageous leader ready to shape the future. As their gazes met across the room, a silent understanding passed between them. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. That night, as the twin moons cast their silver glow over the palace gardens, Leora stood alone beneath the stars. The road ahead would not be easy. Betrayals still needed to be uncovered, alliances rebuilt, and wounds healed. But for the first time in years, she felt hopeful. Hopeful for herself, for her kingdom, and for the bond she shared with Elias, a bond that transcended worlds and promised something greater than either of them could have imagined. In the days following the mercenaries' defeat, Solvoria began to heal. The palace halls, once marred by chaos and destruction, were slowly restored to their former glory. Crystals that had been shattered during the attack were replaced with new ones, their soft glow symbolizing hope and renewal. Yet beneath the surface of this recovery, tensions lingered. Questions remained unanswered. Who had betrayed them? How had the mercenaries known so much about the luminolite mines? And Leora's mission? Princess Leora sat in her private study, poring over documents and maps spread across the table before her. Her mind raced as she tried to piece together clues. Though grateful for the support of her people and family, She couldn't shake the feeling that danger still loomed. Betrayal from within was a wound that cut deeper than any blade. It undermined trust and left scars that wouldn't easily fade. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Enter," she called, turning to see Captain Elias Vane step inside. His uniform was clean now, though faint bruises on his face served as reminders of the battles they'd fought. Despite his injuries, he carried himself with quiet confidence, his presence bringing an unexpected sense of calm to the room. "You've been working nonstop," he observed, nodding toward the piles of papers scattered around her. "You need rest." Leora sighed, leaning back in her chair. "There's too much to do. Every moment counts if we're going to prevent another attack." Elias crossed the room and took a seat opposite her. "I understand your urgency, but you can't shoulder all of this alone. You have allies, friends, who want to help." She hesitated, meeting his steady gaze. For years, she had relied solely on herself, believing no one else would. But Elias had proven time and again that he saw her not as a burden, but as someone worth standing beside. Slowly, she nodded. "You're right. I don't know where to start." He smiled faintly. "Start with what matters most. Rebuilding trust with your people, your family, and yourself." Trust was exactly what Leora sought to rebuild when she proposed an idea that would change Solvoria forever. Standing before the Royal Council later that week, she outlined her vision for a cultural exchange program between Solvoria and Earth. The initiative would allow scholars, artisans, and diplomats from both worlds to share knowledge and traditions, fostering mutual understanding and strengthening ties between their civilizations. "This isn't just about diplomacy," Leora explained, her voice filled with conviction. "It's about learning from each other, about bridging the gap between our differences and finding common ground." The council listened intently, some nodding in agreement while others exchanged skeptical glances. Advisor Kale, however, spoke up first. "Your Highness, such an endeavor would require significant resources and risk exposing us to potential threats." "I understand the risks," Leora replied firmly. "But isolation has only made us vulnerable. By opening ourselves to collaboration, we become stronger, not weaker." Her words resonated deeply, especially after the recent invasion. Many council members began to see the value in her proposal, recognizing it as a bold yet necessary step forward. With their tentative approval, plans for the exchange program moved swiftly into motion. As construction began on the Solvoria Earth Exchange Center, a grand structure designed to reflect the beauty of both planets, Leora found herself spending more time with Elias. Their partnership extended beyond shared goals. It blossomed into something far deeper. Conversations that once revolved around strategy and survival now turned to dreams and aspirations. They walked together through the crystal forests, sharing stories of their childhoods and discussing the future they hoped to build. One evening, as they stood beneath the twin moons overlooking the nearly completed center, Elias broke the comfortable silence between them. "You've come so far, Leora. I'm proud of everything you've accomplished." She glanced at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you. You believed in me when no one else did. And I always will," he said softly, his eyes locking onto hers. "But there's something I need to tell you. My mission here is almost complete. Once the exchange program is launched, I'll be recalled to Earth." The news hit her like a punch to the chest. Though she had known this day would come, hearing it aloud made it painfully real. "Will you return?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Elias hesitated, torn between duty and desire. "I don't know. My life is tied to Earth, to my fleet, my crew. But," he paused, searching for the right words, "being here with you has changed me. I care about you, Leora, more than I ever thought possible." Tears welled in her eyes as she reached for his hand. "I care about you too, Elias. But how can we make this work? Our worlds are so different." He squeezed her hand gently. "We'll find a way. Together." Their relationship became a beacon of hope not only for them but for their respective peoples. As news of their bond spread, skepticism gave way to admiration. Citizens of Solvaria marveled at how a human captain had seen worth in their princess when others had dismissed her. On Earth, tales of Leora's bravery and compassion inspired countless individuals, proving that strength came in many forms. Yet, challenges remained. Some members of the royal court viewed Leora's connection with Elias as controversial, fearing it might undermine Solvorian traditions. Others questioned whether a union between two vastly different species could truly endure. Even Leora herself wrestled with doubts, wondering if love alone could bridge the vast distances between their worlds. Despite these uncertainties, she refused to let fear dictate her choices. With Elias by her side, whether physically or in spirit, she embraced the unknown, determined to forge a path that honored both her heritage and her heart. On the eve of the Exchange Center's grand opening, Leora stood before a mirror in her chambers, adjusting the intricate silver gown she wore for the occasion. Her reflection showed a woman transformed, not just in appearance, but in spirit. Gone was the timid girl who had hidden in shadows, replaced by a confident leader ready to face whatever lay ahead. A knock at the door drew her attention. Opening it, she found Elias waiting, his expression warm and reassuring. "You look beautiful," he said simply, offering her his arm. "Thank you," she replied, linking her arm with his. Together, they made their way to the ceremony, greeted by cheers and applause from attendees representing both Solvaria and Earth. As Leora delivered her speech, her voice carried a strength and grace that captivated everyone present. She spoke of unity, resilience, and the power of hope to transcend boundaries. When she finished, Elias stepped forward, addressing the crowd as well. "Princess Leora has taught me that true strength lies not in titles or appearances, but in courage, compassion, and perseverance. She is a leader unlike any I've ever known, and I am honored to stand beside her." His declaration brought tears to Leora's eyes, earning a standing ovation from the audience. In that moment, surrounded by friends, family, and supporters, she realized that their bond represented more than just personal happiness. It symbolized the possibility of a brighter future for all. As fireworks lit up the night sky, celebrating the launch of the exchange program, Leora and Elias stood hand in hand, gazing out at the stars. Neither knew what challenges awaited them, but one thing was certain: they would face them together, united by love and a shared vision for peace across worlds. The grand opening of the Solvaria Earth Exchange Center marked a turning point not only for Princess Leora, but for both planets. The event had drawn dignitaries, scholars, and citizens from across the galaxy, all eager to witness the historic collaboration between two vastly different worlds. As the celebrations wound down and the crowds dispersed, Leora found herself reflecting on how far she and her kingdom had come. Standing on the balcony of the newly constructed center, she gazed out at the shimmering crystal forests bathed in the light of Solvoria's twin moons. The air was alive with energy, carrying whispers of hope and renewal. For years, she had felt like an outsider in her own world, dismissed and underestimated by those around her. But now, she stood as a beacon of change, a symbol of resilience and unity. It wasn't just about proving her worth anymore. It was about building something greater than herself. Elias joined her moments later, his presence grounding her even amidst the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside her. "It's beautiful," he said, gesturing toward the glowing landscape below. "But nothing compares to seeing you up here, leading with such grace." Leora smiled faintly, though her thoughts remained heavy. "Do you think this will last, or are we setting ourselves up for failure?" He turned to face her, his expression serious yet reassuring. "No one can predict the future, but what I do know is that every step you've taken, from facing mercenaries to uniting two worlds, has been driven by courage and love. That's a foundation strong enough to weather any storm." His words lingered in her mind, offering comfort even as doubts persisted. She knew their journey wouldn't be easy, Bridging the gap between Solvoria and Earth required more than goodwill. It demanded compromise, patience, and sacrifice. Yet, looking into Elias's eyes, she realized they were ready to take on whatever challenges lay ahead, together. In the weeks following the ceremony, life began to settle into a rhythm of cautious optimism. Scholars from Earth arrived to study Solvorian healing techniques, while artisans shared their knowledge of advanced technology with local craftsmen. Diplomats worked tirelessly to draft agreements that would benefit both civilizations, ensuring the exchange program remained sustainable for generations to come. For Leora, the days were filled with meetings, negotiations, and public appearances. Though exhausting, she embraced her responsibilities with renewed determination. Each decision she made reinforced her belief that leadership wasn't about wielding power, it was about serving others and creating opportunities for growth. Amidst her busy schedule, she carved out time to spend with Elias. Their conversations ranged from lighthearted banter to deep discussions about the future. One evening, as they strolled through the gardens surrounding the palace, Elias broached a topic that had weighed heavily on his mind. "I've been thinking," he began hesitantly, stopping beneath a towering crystal tree. "About us. About what comes next." Leora tensed slightly, sensing the gravity of his tone. "What do you mean?" I don't want to leave you behind." He took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "Earth needs me, yes, but so does Solvoria. And I can't imagine my life without you in it." Her heart skipped a beat, torn between joy and apprehension. "Are you saying you'd stay here on Solvoria?" "Not permanently," he clarified, "but I could serve as a liaison between our worlds. Someone who bridges the gap, not just politically, but personally." Tears welled in her eyes as she processed his offer. It wasn't a perfect solution. They would still face separation during missions, but it was a promise of commitment. "I'd like that," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "More than anything." Relief washed over Elias's face as he pulled her into a gentle embrace. "Then it's settled. We'll figure out the details later. For now, let's focus on making this work." Their announcement sparked mixed reactions among the royal court. Some advisors praised the decision, viewing it as a strategic move to strengthen ties between Solvoria and Earth. Others expressed concern, questioning whether a human could truly integrate into Solvorian society. Despite the skepticism, Leora remained steadfast in her support for Elias, vouching for his dedication and integrity. King Aldrin and Queen Seraphine, however, offered their full blessing. "Love knows no boundaries," King Aldrin remarked during a private meeting. "If anyone deserves happiness, it's you, my daughter. And if Captain Vane makes you happy, then we welcome him with open arms." Queen Seraphine added warmly, "Just remember, you're not alone in this. Your family will always stand by you." Their words brought tears to Leora's eyes, reinforcing the sense of belonging she had fought so hard to find. For the first time in years, she felt truly supported, not because of her title or abilities, but because of who she was. As months passed, the exchange program flourished, fostering connections that transcended cultural and planetary divides. Children from Earth learned about Solvorian history and traditions, while young Solvorians marveled at Earth's diverse landscapes and innovations. The exchange became a testament to the power of understanding and cooperation, proving that differences didn't have to divide. They could unite. Through it all, Leora and Elias remained inseparable. Their bond grew stronger with each passing day, rooted in mutual respect and shared dreams. They faced challenges together, navigating the complexities of interplanetary diplomacy while cherishing quiet moments under the stars. Though distance occasionally separated them when duty called, their connection never wavered. One evening, as they stood side by side beneath the twin moons, Elias broke the silence. "Do you ever wonder what the future holds?" "All the time," Leora admitted, smiling softly. "But I've learned to trust the journey, even when I can't see the destination." He nodded, squeezing her hand gently. "Whatever lies ahead, we'll face it together." That's what matters most. Years later, historians would look back on this era as a golden age of unity, a time when two worlds came together to create something extraordinary. But for Lyora and Elias, it was simply the beginning of a lifelong adventure. Together, they'd proved that love and hope could transcend even the vastness of space, forging bonds that defied expectations and inspired countless others.